Welcome to another episode. Glad to have you. Interesting topic for today, only because a lot of people don't know that this specific set of rules and laws actually apply to higher education institutions too. Today we're going to be talking about HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. It's actually an important topic, particularly for those institutions that handle personal health information. And an enlightening moment for me was essentially understanding that institutions that offer degrees or certificates or any type of education in clinical studies, so nursing, med schools, and we work with a lot of institutions that do that, actually have implications or risk, of HIPAA, not just universities that are involved with care centers and hospitals and research, which is where most people go when they think of HIPAA and, higher education. So let's get into it, right? HIPAA focuses primarily on protecting sensitive patient health information from being disclosed without consent. Very similar to FERPA. We had a episode on FERPA in the past, and we have a lot of documentation and articles to help those in the compliance world and education leaders in administering those policies and being in compliance with FERPA. Similar, just slightly different, right? It's all about protection of sensitive information or private personal information. And it's important for those with health centers, counseling services, research departments dealing with personal health information, and those that educate, in clinical and health, careers. So, when does HIPAA apply to you specifically as a university or college? Let's break those down. So, if you have a health center or any kind of clinic that's owned by the institution, whether you provide care to your students or the public, which is very common, right, for institutions that require their students to complete a certain set of clinicals to graduate its degree or programs, you essentially conduct transactions electronically, like billing, transferring medical records, and things of that nature, and all that data is actually covered by HIPAA. So records, billing, coding, all the above. If you offer any kind of counseling services, whether you charge for them or not, so if you have, counselors on site employed by the university or college to support your active student body, or maybe it's a service that you offer to the community for students enrolled in, psych programs and things like that, same exact thing. You have to comply with HIPAA. And you essentially meet a criteria of a covered entity, which involves electronic transaction of this information. In any research that involves personal health information, so if you're doing any kind of test trials of any kind, if your research requires, the participation of humans, essentially, then you are subject to HIPAA regulations. Now, not areas are covered, so I think this is important to understand, right? Not all university operations are covered under HIPAA. Specifically, like we spoke about a few minutes ago, areas like educational records are instead covered by FERPA, and it's important to distinguish the two, right? For this specific case, there are certain things that you can do to ensure compliance. I think the very first thing you have to figure out as an institution, right, or someone responsible for that institution, is, are you a covered entity under HIPAA or not? And once you figure that out, it comes down to the four pillars: training awareness, data protection measures, you have to have appropriate policies and procedures, and you've got to conduct regular audits. So you've got to stress the importance of training to all staff. So anybody that handles personal health information has to be trained on HIPAA requirements, including confidentiality and security practices, right? Just like in FERPA, you've got to have data protection measures, secure storage, data encryption, and proper disposal methods for private health information. There's this great, not great, but complex crossover in higher education between GOBA, FERPA, and HIPAA. And usually you can design your data protection measures and your cybersecurity measures to comply with all three and meet all the, the requirements for compliance in that way. You got to have the appropriate policies and procedures, right? You need clear HIPAA policies. They should include, protocols for handling private health information, breach notification procedures, and penalties for noncompliance on staff, employee, third-party vendors, and contractors. And you need some type of audit measure, right? So whether that's a test of your cybersecurity measures, and whether that's a test of your people, a test of your data infrastructure, to identify any vulnerability in the handling of PHI. A lot of great companies that can help you do that. And we've also worked with a lot of institutions that built it internally for themselves. There's a lot of challenges that face universities with HIPAA compliance, right? Balancing the need for accessibility to student health information, for treatment purposes and privacy obligations, right? So there's an extreme case of this where you're a large university that has its own medical center. There's a small case of this where, you have a very small program or degree offering to a very small student population, where clinicals are a requirement and there's a small amount of data, not a lot of students impacted, right? So you get to figure out how to balance that. I think technology and security becomes a huge burden for most institutions, especially with increased use of digital platforms and remote services. The multiple regulatory environments, right? How do you balance the requirements of GLBA, which just in the last, couple years became applicable to higher education institutions, FERPA, which has been around for a long time, but is administered in a much more dynamic digital environment, and HIPAA. We always urge that compliance officers, chief technical officers, leaders look at their cybersecurity data infrastructure through the lens of those three today. And it is challenging and it's expensive. And we know that that's a tough challenge, for most institutions to work through. Now, there are some benefits for being compliant with HIPAA, right? You're doing a great job protecting student privacy, which can enhance student trust in the university's health services. If you provide them, you're increasing, your institution's reputation. Robust compliance we've seen can improve a university's reputation for responsibly managing sensitive information. You obviously are avoiding legal and financial penalties, which we'll talk about, here in just a little bit. There's actually several case laws related to HIPAA violations in higher education, particularly involving university health centers or services that handle PHI. Specific case law directly involving the universities is not as common, right? It's always kind of tied to a service that a college may provide. Most HIPAA violation cases are related to unauthorized access and disclosure. So cases that often involve, unauthorized access to information, PHI that is, where a provider, may face penalties if an employee improperly accessed or shared somebody's information, whether it's with a parent or a third party without a valid reason. Universities with clinics have to ensure that only authorized personnel can access, students' private health information, and that all the information is disclosed only for appropriate use. If you get caught in trouble, the enforcement actions are typically, administered by the HHS Office for Civil Rights that handles the investigations of these things. That's called the OCR. And they investigate breaches of PHI security. which can result, at the institution level from hacking, lost devices, and employees' computers left somewhere, improper disposal of, non-digital records, especially unencrypted data on digital devices, college laptops, college, mobile phones. Those breaches, may face similar investigations and penalties. The specific, very specific cases related to this have been mainly around lost, stolen devices and improper disposal. In fact, in 2011, the Massachusetts General Hospital agreed to pay a pretty big settlement after an employee left the private healthcare information of hundreds of patients on a subway. And then there was a case in 2011, too, from the University of California, Los Angeles healthcare system, and they agreed to a settlement due to an employee repeatedly essentially snooping into celebrity medical records and the medical records of celebrity children. So it's interesting. It doesn't apply to all colleges and universities. I think the litmus test is if you're storing, right, the private health information of students for whatever reason, you have to comply with HIPAA, and you have to have the proper measure, technology, protocol, and training and audit procedure to stay in compliance, and that you could face, right, enforcement action based off of non-compliance. And for most times, non-compliance is essentially caused accidentally, right, or purposefully through improper disclosure. So it's an interesting one. It's definitely out of the norm, but one of those things we have to deal with in higher education. Hope you enjoyed the episode.